Hi guys, it's Debbie, and today I am back to speak about a topic I've never spoken about on the channel, Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan is one of the most successful directors working at the moment. He is well known for his epic science fiction movies, his Batman trilogy, as well as some older or lesser known thrillers. And let's just say that the average consensus is that his works are good. Over the course of the years, many people have pointed out how it would be interesting to see Nolan without that same huge budget, or how his films are overachieving and just hyped up because of his name attached to them. And basically, opinions are very split about his titles. So while we're waiting for Oppenheimer, his new upcoming movie, I thought it would be interesting to share my ranking of his films, as he's one of my favorite directors. And of course, I would love to hear your opinion on his movies, so make sure to leave a comment down below. Okay, now get into it. The sad thing about these lists is that something has got to be on the bottom. We have to start from somewhere. There has to be a name at the bottom of the list. At the bottom of the list, I would put Nolan's super early works, because although they're good, you can't really compare a 2-minute black and white amateur short film to what he made years later. I'm just mentioning Doodlebug because it's part of Nolan's filmography, but it's usually not even included in these lists. It's shorter than a YouTube ad, but following it instead is what is considered Nolan's first proper film. And it's the mysterious story of a man who is, as per the title, following people around his city, and one thing leads to another. Now, fun fact, while Nolan is now known to have access to huge production budgets, this film was basically devised to cost as little as possible. Rumour has it that Nolan's mum was making sandwiches for the cast, who were his friends. Okay, now moving up the list. Next, I would put Insomnia. I like Insomnia. I actually like all the titles on today's list, but it's probably what I would consider Nolan's least original work. Although his brother Jonathan has written many of the scripts of his movies, it's always been a collaborative work or even a co-written script. Even the Batman movies are innovative, even if they're based on comic books, because after all, they rework and reimagine the concepts that are presented. Whereas Insomnia is literally a remake of an older movie, so it can't really get the points for his usual mind-blowing 10 years to make works. But still, Insomnia is a great watch. It actually has an impressive cast: Al Pacino, Robin Williams, Hilary Swank, who are all involved in the investigation of a dark murder case in Alaska. Okay, now moving up, things are getting a little trickier. So I decided to put Batman Begins, a great movie, but which I wouldn't compare to other titles I will speak about further on in the video. Also, in my opinion, Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy heavily rotates around the middle film, Dark Knight. Actually, many people haven't even seen the first and third movie, or only vaguely remember them. Most audiences took them more like an introduction and conclusion to Christian Bale's story as Batman, with the gem being his relationship with the Joker, which also influenced many other comic book movies that would follow. So for now, I decided to put Batman Begins here, as it is a great movie. I love the build up to the protagonist, introduction to the other characters in the saga, but still not as high as other titles. And as we go up, next we have Dunkirk. Now, while compiling this list, I tried to set aside as much as possible my personal taste. As you know, I am not a particularly die-hard fan of the war genre, so it'll be interesting to see how Oppenheimer plays out. But I think this is a good position anyway for Dunkirk. From what we know, Dunkirk was one of Nolan's most personal passions, something he wanted to create for years. The film is based on real events during the First World War and a desperate situation in which hundreds of stranded soldiers found themselves surrounded by the enemy. Now, apparently years prior to the film, Nolan and his wife carried out a trip across the English Channel and realised how treacherous the conditions were, even without people bombing them from left, right and above. And from that moment, the director had been wanting to put this story, the story of these soldiers, on film for years, and he definitely managed very well in his intent. Dunkirk ticks all the boxes of the classic Nolan overlapping timelines and multiple points of view. As a matter of fact, the same battle plays from earth, air and sea, each with their own timing, but being within the true history box, it couldn't obviously reach too much beyond the historical facts. It's a well-made movie, but not groundbreaking or mind-blowing as some of his other works. For example, around the same time, 1917 by Sam Mendes was released, and the two films aren't vastly different. Then above Dunkirk, I put The Prestige. If you were in school and had to make a presentation about Nolan's works, the development of the characters, the timelines, the themes, everything, you would just show this film. The Prestige is the story of two rival magicians who basically won't stop at anything in order to shock their audience and be the #1 magician in London or in the world. This is one of those films in which you can't turn away even for 1 second without missing an important element element in the storyline. And also it is one of Nolan's films that are not included that often in many lists, so I always try to talk about it as much as possible, and if you haven't seen it, it is highly recommended. Above The Prestige, I put The Dark Knight Rises. And now see, this is where people start to get into discussions, as many consider this Nolan's best film, or even the best comic book movie of all time. And I can definitely see their point of view, but I still think Nolan has worked on even more impressive stories. I definitely wouldn't put this above the Joker's story. So The Dark Knight Rises is the third and final film in Nolan's Batman trilogy, and it unfortunately fitted very well in the historical context in which it was released, which was a general feeling of threat throughout the world of attacks on big cities, and then the whole discussion of the people that would benefit from that. So for many people, this was a very heartfelt movie, and although it's a comic book story, but they found it very realistic. It also introduces a very intriguing and realistically threatening villain, Tom Hardy's Bane, who is absolutely terrifying. But let's see what's above The Dark Knight Rises. So above that, I put Memento, which I have often said is one of Nolan's films I like the least, but that is just an incredibly personal taste that I'm trying to leave out as much as possible from this list. The reason why I don't love Memento is that I never found it as fluid as some of Nolan's other films, although it's made like that because of the nature of the plot. The protagonist is a guy who has lost his memory. Basically every day he wakes up with his mind as a blank slate with no recollection of what has happened, so he tattoos important facts on his body so he'll always see them, including the fact that something bad happened to his wife and this guy Teddy might be involved. So the whole film starts over and over and over every time this guy goes to sleep, and adds on new information every time he wakes up. Now, regardless of my personal taste, this film is very high up in the list because it is basically the blueprint for Nolan's future work, as well as being a huge source of inspiration for many other filmmakers. We might be used to Nolan's mind-blowing plots now, but 20 years ago, this was his first big, complicated story, and it was a huge influence for many people in the industry. Okay, then above I put Tenet. If you had asked me to make this list 2 years ago, Tenet would have been much lower on the list. I definitely had a few grudges towards this film when it was released, but it took me a few rewatches and a lot of reflection to understand what a well put together film this is. Tenet is the story of our world, which has been affected by something that hasn't happened yet. How can I put this without spoilers? Basically, people in the future have figured out how to tamper with time. They've done a lot of mess and it's affecting us, which leads to bad people taking advantage of this, Kenneth Branagh, and good people trying to fix it, like John David Washington and Robert Pattinson. This film does suffer a little from Nolan patting himself on the shoulder and saying, hey, look how good I have become at making complicated plots. I even got characters walking backwards. I even got guns firing backwards. And it also has the little problem of it being really hard to understand the first time you watch it. But if you think of it, 20 plus years have passed since the release of The Matrix, and we're still Googling what on earth that was all about and what the blueberries and spider were in Enemy. Think about Mr. Nobody, and let's just all pretend we immediately understood the bedroom scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I personally came to the conclusion that Tenet really is a cinematic masterpiece. The organization of the whole storyline, the effects, the soundtrack, the character arc. But we have now reached the podium, the top three. At number 3, I am going to controversially put Interstellar, which many people hate and say is Nolan's worst film ever. Now, from the huge Interstellar poster you can see in 90% of my videos, you can tell that I like Interstellar. I could easily say it is one of my favourite films of all time. That being said, I can definitely see why some people don't like this film. It is very different from his genre. It is very long, it takes a long time to get into the story, and it also includes themes that aren't very typical for the genre. So people going into it thinking it would have been like Passengers or Gravity, The Martian, we're very surprised. But this film is incredible. It's the story of our world coming to an end until a rare and mysterious opportunity allows humans to explore space and other potential worlds, while also dealing with a lot of moral doubts that come with a mission of that size. It also includes incredibly accurate depiction of space, wormholes, black holes, for which the crew worked alongside astrophysicists. In second place, I'm going to put Inception. Inception really is one of those films for which you have to sit down and actually come up with something bad to say about the film. Now on my channel, there's another video I made in which I talk about Inception and its incredible similarities with previous films, including an older Japanese film called Paprika. It isn't new for Nolan to take plenty of inspiration from other works. The Dark Knight has scene-to-scene comparisons with The Crow. Interstellar could be seen as a fanboy project for 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in that video, I explained how the world of art tends to create a continuous chain of inspiration. And although films do take inspiration from previous works, they also set a template of inspiration for other films to come. For example, the new Batman film has scenes which are very similar to The Dark Knight, which was similar to The Crow. Inception really is one of those films you have to watch before you die. It is so popular that the actual term Inception is now used in common languages to explain something complicated or a situation within a situation. The story revolves around heists, but performed within the mind, so people can access other people's dreams to plant or extract information. And that doesn't only mean analysing the world of dreams, but also a lot of other ethical and philosophical concepts. The only other Christopher Nolan film I think could top Inception is The Dark Knight, the shining gem of Nolan's Batman trilogy and what is often considered the best comic book movie ever made. I honestly don't think I have anything particularly negative to say about this film. I can't recall anybody I know saying something particularly bad about this movie. Heath Ledger was absolutely incredible as the deranged villain of the story, the Joker, who is taunting Batman with plans which on the one hand don't make much sense as he just wants to watch the world burn, but which if seen from his point of view do offer a lot of food for thought. There has been a lot of discussion about whether The Dark Knight was a defining point for the comic book movies that followed, as there definitely has been a turn towards darker, more realistic tones within the genre, but that probably also has to do with the general attitude of filmmaking in regards to villains, especially in a post 9/11 America, in which people were no longer afraid of a giant alien monster, but rather the person next to them on the subway. And with that, we have reached the top of my ranking of Christopher Nolan films while waiting for Oppenheimer. Of course, I would love to hear your thoughts on his films. What are your favourite ones? Which ones you absolutely hate? Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.